Joined by TSN Hockey Insider Pierre Lebrun. Pierre, Doug Armstrong didn't want to do it, but late Tuesday night he finally fired Craig Berube. It was a little over 5 years ago Armstrong made a similar move replacing Mike Yeo with Berube, and the club went on an incredible run. Eventually they won the Stanley Cup, but it's kind of hard to imagine this version of the Blues replicating that sort of magic, is it not, Pierre?
Yeah, Gino, the difference 5, 6 years later is that the expectations are a bit lower than they were then. I mean, that was a team back then that was really underachieving in the sense that the Blues had entered that season expecting to be a Stanley Cup contender and, of course, ended up winning the Stanley Cup in a miraculous turnaround under Craig Berube. This time around with Berube's firing, I mean, this is a team that at the start of the year really just hoped to make the playoffs, maybe finish third in their division. And they still do, and that's why they made this coaching change. But at the end of the day, to use Doug Armstrong's own words from the summer, this is a team in transition. This is not a Stanley Cup contender. And so the Blues are trying to turn parts of this roster over while staying competitive. Easier said than done. Obviously, we've seen the Boston Bruins do it for years. The LA Kings just had a great retool. We'll see whether or not the Blues can pull that off. But it's going to be complicated. The Blues have some aging core players. They have players with no trade clauses. And it really comes down to the players actually playing to the contracts that they're earning right now. There's some high-paid players that have not played well this year for the St. Louis Blues.
So if this is a transition type of year for the St. Louis Blues, and I'll use your word and Doug Armstrong's words, do you think Armstrong continues to make changes and we see him get pretty busy between now and the March 8th trade deadline, at least looking to make maybe even some significant moves?
I mean, I think he will try, Gino. He tried to make some pretty big moves last summer, but this is one of the issues he has on his team. He has a number of players with full no trade clauses. And you remember a trade that fell through last summer was Torrey Krug, who decided not to waive his no move, and that canceled the trade that the Blues had on tap. So that's part of the issue for the Blues as they move forward, is that they've got players who have a lot of say in their futures. At the same time, there may be players that by the end of this year don't want to be around as part of this transition. And I thought it was interesting to hear Jordan Binnington today talking about being proud to wear the blue note, and if you're not proud to wear the jersey, then get out of here. So there's clearly some interesting conversations happening in that dressing room about this team that's in transition and about the players that want to stick around through this roster makeover. Doug Armstrong has made a lot of big trades during his career, and he won't be afraid to do so again.
All right, then let me ask you this. The next natural question is, how much of this is on Doug Armstrong? Because if these players can't win the way they are, and he can't move their contracts and revamp and rebuild, how much of this is on the GM himself?
Yeah, and that's a fair question, and I give Doug Armstrong credit for taking some responsibility for where they are today during his news conference in explaining the coaching change. And I think that was important to hear. I mean, the reality is, when you win for a very long time in a salary cap system like the Blues have done, including winning a cup in 2019, you end up paying the price over time, I think, with some of your contract decisions. And, I think we've seen that in Pittsburgh, right? The Penguins are trying to keep the window open, but they've got some aging players and some big contracts. We've seen that in Washington. And we're seeing that in St. Louis, where perhaps there's some extensions and player signings that, frankly, in the moment felt right to keep the band together, but perhaps should have not happened, as far as perhaps the Blues should have maybe tried to go younger here over the last few years. Again, easier said than done, but I think that's a fair question, Gino.
When Mike Yeo was fired, Armstrong said, and I quote, "Mike is paying for the sins of our collective group," end quote. Now the Blues loses a 4 straight and sitting out of a playoff spot. Berube is paying that same price. Hockey Insider, Pierre Lebrun.